everybody. This is Angelica McDonald with another episode of the Next One Up podcast. Today, I have a special friend on to interview, Mr. Brandon Locklear. He is class of 2010.
Right.
Class of 2010 from Polk County High School. Welcome, Brandon. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Thank you for agreeing to this interview. Actually, you were one of the first people that I told about this, like the idea of this podcast. Do you remember that conversation?
This has been a while in the making, isn't it? That's probably
it has. So it's so funny. We're finally, and I was like, I got to get you on. And I started doing, recording. I was like, wait a minute. I need to get Brandon on. Let me see when he's available. So I'm glad that you're on and you get to share your sports story. So, of course, let's start from the beginning. When did you start your sports journey, and what sports did you play?
Okay, so I think the first time I'd ever gotten anything athletic was probably about kindergarten. I was really energetic. So my mom put me in gymnastics probably about kindergarten. Before I had really even started school. So I did gymnastics for about a year or so. For whatever reason, I stopped. I don't even remember why I stopped doing gymnastics, but I picked back up Pee Wee football and basketball probably in about the third or fourth grade. So that's kind of when sports kind of took its relationship in my life there.
Gotcha. Wait a minute, you did gymnastics in Rayford?
I think the place that I would go was actually in Lumberton at the time.
Okay, because I don't ever remember us having gymnastics in Rayford now, not our age.
I remember having a drive afar, and I'm quite sure that might have played some role in me not going very long.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Was the distance, but it was really one of those things that my mom thought it was really engaging for me to go. The coaches kind of turned me loose. I had recently been diagnosed with ADHD, so I was on medication at the time, so they were trying to find different things to kind of keep me focused in class and things like that. So that was one of those things I got to do outside of school to keep me kind of engaged.
Gotcha. And you know what? That's we'll get into that later. We'll get into that in further in the interview about using sports as a mechanism for I guess exertion of energy. But what inspired you to start playing? I mean, you said that your mom put you in gymnastics, at a young age when you were diagnosed with ADHD. But what kept you wanting to continue to play sports?
Well, I've always been competitive. I'm probably one of those guys that, like, when we play Connect Four or Tic-Tac-Toe, I hate to lose. So I've always been really competitive. I grew up in a neighborhood, where there's a lot of kids kind of my age, a few years older, a few years younger. We always had a basketball court and a volleyball court that we played on Sundays and on the weekends and things like that when kids were out of school. So I always was playing athletics in some kind of way out in the community. And then I was a smaller kid too. So a lot of the kids that I played with up until probably high school were always a lot bigger than me. So I kind of had to be mean and rough at an early age to just hold my own in any sport I played. So,
gotcha. So you did it because you were competitive, and then you wanted to kind of show your aggression a little bit.
Right,
you wanted to be tough.
Yeah, because you sit back, on Sundays, the neighborhood and everybody, the community kind of comes out. I don't know if your neighborhood was the same way, but I imagine if you grew up in Rayford, you kind of congregate in those areas, those down-home areas. And the guys that you look up to are the guys that are out there playing basketball. They're scoring, points left and right on guys, or they're talking junk to one another. And you kind of idolize those guys in those moments and just seeing the athleticism out in the streets.
Mm-hmm. Especially because in the streets, there's no rules.
Right. Everything negotiation.
Yeah, you get hit in the head with a ball. You gotta suck it up and keep it moving.
Right. That was a foul, right?
Yeah. No, it was not.
No blood, no foul.
Right. So who are you? Well, wait a minute. So you play more, you said Pee Wee football and something else, but you didn't mention one of these sports that I know you from.
So I didn't get into wrestling until the 9th grade. That was my first time ever wrestling. Okay. So but the strange thing about wrestling is that my whole family pretty much has been in and out of wrestling pretty much 3 or 4 generations back. My
Oh,
father,
really?
my father, my uncles both wrestled here at Hope County. They have cousins that they all wrestled with that are about the same age. I got an uncle on my mom's side; he wrestled. So the wrestling didn't come in until later. To be honest, I never thought that I would be wrestling. That didn't really. That kind of when it was brought to me was really crazy. It was kind of a far fetched thing at the time, but. And to be honest, I would not. They would not have. I've not have ever been approached about wrestling had Walworth not known about my family being so heavily
Lord.
involved. Walworth was the guy who was the head coach when I was in high school.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
wait a minute, your family never told you that they wrestle, or they
And they did, but there was no organized wrestling in Hope County.
Oh, okay.
Parks and Rec wrestling didn't come along until I was in high school already. I had already started.
Okay.
There weren't many. Cumberland County wasn't quite the hotbed of wrestling that it is now. There were a couple club teams there, but we were dirt poor. I wasn't going to be able to afford $200 a month or $150 a month to travel to Cumberland County to wrestle, that kind of thing. So even when I got into it, traveling to wrestle, it wasn't much of it here in this area. It was not been until recently that you have kind of this hotbed of a region that you got now with Hope County, Cumberland County, and Moore County. And I even say Robertson County.
That's interesting because, growing up, I remember, look, on Saved by the Bell, they were wrestling. I remember them wrestling like AC Slater. So in my mind, I thought that wrestling was a thing and everywhere. So that's really interesting that it really didn't start surfacing until like the early 2000s.
The early 2000s, yeah, the early 2000s.
That's so
it was, I would say, the military influence in Hope County had a lot to do with it. That's one of those sports that you hear a lot of military families they have some familiarity with, and so I think that kind of influenced it. After deployments kind of got heavy, after 2000, 2003, 2004. There's a large influx of military. This area really grew with the military, and I think that's one of the things that kind of pushed Parks and Rec to say we need to add this.
Gotcha. So you were talking about you felt like you were an unlikely candidate for wrestling. Why is that?
Because I was probably about so going into 9th grade, I was probably about 95 pounds, and it wasn't like a skinny petite 95 pounds. So I was a chunky kid, but I was short and very small. When you think of wrestling, you think about guys like Slater, who's like ripped to the gills. So I was always nervous to me. I was always nervous. I played football and basketball, but as I got to high school, I was too small really to play those sports. And so I tell you a funny story. So the first time that I ever had any interaction with a wrestling coach, right? Dave Blank in the 7th grade brought out some wrestling mats at the tail end of the year, right? Let us do some shots and stuff like that. I met the guy Walworth. I met Walworth that same week, right? He was actually at Jack Britt at the time. So as a 9th grader, that following year, I ended up going to 9th grade. He comes and gets me out of class one day. I'm sitting in 4th period, and I wasn't a troubled child, but there was definitely some times where I had talking tos right outside the classroom. So it's one of the situations where he comes to the class and he calls me out. And so I'm pretty sure I'm getting in trouble for something I've just done in 3rd period or 2nd period or whatnot. And I get out in the hallway and I'm like, I'm not getting suspended, am I? He's like laughing. And he's like, no, man, your dad and your uncle I know wrestled. I don't have a 103. I know you're a smaller kid. You look a little heavy, but I think you're about the size that we need. So I came to practice that day, and my drill partners were 3 girls. It was Heather Walker, Fran Delgado, and Kendra Parks? Kendra. And they beat the snot out of me pretty much my entire 9th grade year. But we really became a family in that time. You know what I mean? I got my butt whooped every day, and some of the other guys gave me a hard time about getting my butt whooped, but I got better. We stuck it out. And it made for some good memories. It made for some really good memories.
Yeah, getting your butt whooped by a bunch of girls.
And then you think think I'm an underclass until I'm a ninth grader wrestling with some of the nicer looking girls from school. So
Oh.
it wasn't completely terrible as a ninth grader. It had its perks.
Right. Well, who were your sports influencers? I mean, I know you said that your family, you know, were wrestlers or, you know, involved in sports, but did you have any other sports influencers?
I'll tell you who a big one was, and he's a really big one for a lot of people in Hope County. But he touched my life in ways that that really made me want to coach, and that's Robert Blue. I made the team in 7th grade. I don't know if you know Antoine McGregor, but Antoine
Oh, yeah.
McGregor was the guy that started. Right. Yeah, of course. So Antoine started in front of me. So I never got to play really. But being on that team and being around him, that was a really rough time in my life. That 7th, 8th grade, that middle school, I had a lot of things going on in life. And he really taught me about being a gentleman, being a man with class, handling things professionally, even as a middle school student. And those things really stood out to me. Not only that, but he really taught me what it means to be competitive, not just wanting to beat somebody, but beat somebody in a way that they can respect you beyond the court. So I would say Robert Blue was a big one for me. Somebody else. Rodney Frazier is another guy. Was another middle school coach that I had. David Blank is another guy. David Blank he's one of those guys that every time I see him, it doesn't matter if we're in the grocery store, at a wrestling tournament, at a funeral, at the pool, he's got a story for me. He's got a joke for me. And it's always very uplifting, and he's always been there with a lot of advice and things like that. So Dave Blank, I met him, I think, in the 6th grade, and he ended up being one of my first wrestling coaches as a freshman. So I'd say Robert Blue, David Blank. Those are probably about as big as it gets right there when you talk about.
Well, look, they sound like some. Well, I already know, like Coach Blue is the reason why I wanted to be, you know, working sports as an attorney. So I mean, straight up, like, and I got to see that as a, you know, as a kid in middle school, and it just is like, imagine it inspires you so early on in your life, and it sets the tone and sets the expectation of what a coach should be. So it's very hard. Like when you see a coach not being there, it's just like in your mind, honestly, I thought that all coaches would be like Coach Blue.
I thought that too.
You know what I mean? So then when they're not like that, it's just like, you know, what are you doing? Like, why are you coaching?
Right.
You know,
I'll tell you one of the bigger things that he taught me. I always, you know, like I mentioned earlier, we weren't the nicest off, especially as I got a little bit older. Things got a little rough. My parents separated and eventually divorced. And so there were some financial struggles there. So in my mind, I always equated financial stability with like parenthood for some reason. And I remember I got sent to ISS one day. I had to be in like the 7th grade because I was playing basketball at the time. And he chewed me out, man, for probably about a good 45 minutes to an hour. Mm-hmm. And he called my mama, and he had my mama come to the classroom, made me stand in front of the class, and he was telling all of the kids in there that that's what a good mother looked like. Mm-hmm. And it took that moment for me to really step back and like appreciate some of the things that my mom had done, given the situations that we were in and things like that. And that moment really changed my scope of perspective, even now as a father, on how I interact with my kids and how I interact with other people's children as well. Yeah. So he's just a powerful guy. Robert Blue is one of those guys that he touched you in a way that most coaches struggle to nowadays.
Yeah. And honestly, I like the fact that, like, he was who he was, and he wasn't going to change for you, but he did it to, like, we used to be scared of him. Like, I remember we used to be scared of him, but, like, by the time you got to 8th grade and had really dealt with him, you learned to respect him and really like him, especially if you got to talk to him one-on-one. It was like, man, this guy's not as mean as I thought he was. You know what I mean? Like, or not mean at all, really.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Exactly. Like, he was actually like a really nice guy, especially if you like been at ISS. And I remember going to ISS once, but it wasn't really because I got in trouble. And I remember him and somebody, I'm trying to think who was in there talking to him. Maybe one of the security guards or someone was in there talking to him at the time. And they were just chopping it up and some of the stuff. And then, he talking to the kids, saying little stuff or whatever. But it was just like, it really made me start to look at him a little differently. So like it's amazing for those type of coaches to influence you, especially when you start to coach, like, and you
Right.
have to like in turn do those things, to your kids. So you play sports in high school. Did you go off to play any like in college, or did it just stop in high school?
Nah, well, so going into my senior year, I was competitive as a wrestler, but I was never dominant to the point that I was I was deserving of a Division I, Division II scholarship or anything like that. My intentions were to walk on at Pembroke. I ended up getting hurt the very tail end of the year. I broke like 4 or 5 ribs. After I broke my ribs, I came back early. I wrestled at conference and regional, and I got hurt again. And so when August came around to start school, as I got ready to walk on, it was just not realistic. Mm-hmm. And then life kind of hit me in the face. I moved out. I had moved out earlier on than most kids do. So I was trying to maintain a job and trying to play college sports and go to school. And, you know how that goes. Mm-hmm. So I ended up not wrestling as I kind of got some stability financially and worked some things out on campus. There's a rugby team out there, so I ended up playing rugby out at UNTP for 4 years, which was
rugby. Yeah, rugby. When I think about rugby, I think about Mean Girls.
So my wife actually played in high school, and the team that she played with, they were just nasty. I mean, you couldn't step on the field with them and be confident because they would crush you. So she tried to get me to start playing rugby early on, and I was just so committed into wrestling that I didn't really see myself playing a sport like that. And then I got to UNCP. I think my first year, I was played with a guy named Trey McFall, who was the president at the time. And then when he graduated, they kind of voted me president, and so I ended up taking over the club. And it was just a really good experience to kind of learn that sport, develop some camaraderie, and get a degree. Yeah. It really motivated me to stay in college because academics was rough for me that time period. So it really gave me something kind of to knuckle down and focus on.
Well, that's interesting because, again, like using it as a positive influence, like, it helped you with your, mental health, disability, and then it helped you to stay in school and graduate college. Like, right. I think sports get a bad rap sometimes. Like, I really think that people just think, oh, you playing sports and that's it, it's a waste of time. But it really is something that can contribute positively to your life. It really can. Like, it's like, I don't think people, and I think low key, it's people that they don't know how to play sports.
I was going to say, I think the other thing too is that when you're an athlete and people are seeking you out as an athlete, that's a unique experience to an athlete.
Right.
And then a lot of times when you have really stout athletes or people who have been consistent in sports or just have a natural knack, I found those are generally kids that have had some adversity in their life. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of times that people will criticize students about their particular situations or what the details or the variables may be to their situation. But there's a lot of times you're dealing with a student, there's circumstances that they've not dictated, things that they've not set in place themselves. Mm-hmm. And they're really relying on the leadership around them, the guidance of the people around them to kind of set that stuff in place. And a lot of times, especially now, it's not too uncommon to get a kid who is far more athletic than kids at his age, but not quite as academically developed as kids of his age. And I think one of the reasons for something like that happening is because it becomes such a focus on a kid as an athlete because people can see the potential early on that the academics can sometimes be not necessarily pushed to the side, but overlooked in a way that is not as productive for the student. But a lot of times that's not the student's fault. Right. That's the leadership and the guidance around them. Mm-hmm. And so anytime I deal with student athletes quite a bit. So this is something that I hear quite often is that student athletes are treated a little better maybe than most other students. And one of the things that I like to point out is that it may be given to be a good academic or expected to be a good academic, but it says a lot for a student to be a full-time athlete and still get it done in the classroom. And to me, I really commend some of those students because it just goes to show you how well dedicated and committed they are and the difference that work ethic can make even at an early age for 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old. And I would challenge somebody, especially if they're younger, for saying that playing sports is not nearly as difficult as people make it seem, or that there's nothing to it. Because if you're serious, especially when you're talking about a sport like wrestling, where it's on your mind constantly. I don't get to just leave the mat room and that's the end of it. I think about it when I'm sitting down to eat. I'm thinking about it before I go to bed. I'm thinking about it when I get up because I want to make sure my weight's on point, that my calories are where they're supposed to be, that I'm working out enough, that my cardio is where it needs to be, that I'm not lifting too much, but I'm lifting enough. So then I got to worry about my academics. So there's really a lot on some of these student athletes' plates, especially when you get a student who can handle the athletic caseload and then turn around and handle the caseload in the classroom. There's really when you see some students shine. And what I've learned is that when you come across a kid like that, when you put pressure on them, you put them in those situations where, hey, you got to get a paper done, man. It's Thursday. We got a game Friday. It's 3 pages. What you going to do? When you put that kind of pressure on an athlete who's committed, they get it done. And I really like to see student athletes get put in positions like that where they kind of got to put rubber to the road.
So you were speaking about you working with a lot of student athletes. What do you currently do? What is your profession?
So I'm the college and career ready coordinator. It's gonna be a mouthful. Out at Hood County High School. So currently, what I do is I'd say quite a bit, but so I work with the any military branch directly. I coordinate all that contact with them for students. I coordinate all the ASVAB testing as well that it goes along with the military. I do all of the scholarship coordination out at the high school. Anything concerning eligibility center for student athletes, I do that as well. And then I coach wrestling and football. So those two on top of it. There are not many student athletes that I don't come in contact with on top of the eligibility center stuff that I do as well. So,
woo, you do a lot. Jeez.
And we ain't getting into specifics. We won't even get into specifics.
I know.
We want to talk about summer school right now.
You know, I know everything you do in my personal conversations. But so that means that you encounter, like, because you encounter the kids a lot, you understand like the challenges they face. So what were some challenges that you faced during your sports journey, and how did you overcome them? And also comparing them to what the kids do now. Like, what do they face now?
I'll tell you, one of the biggest things that influenced me was my parents went through a really rough divorce. And that's something like you hear a lot about, you hear kids talk about, but we really don't really consider how many factors and how many different facets of kids' lives that it influenced. And it really put me in a bubble for a handful of years that it took having a support group that sports brought me to really bring me out of that and finally find this personality that I have, this ability that I have to go and speak and talk to people. And so it really pulled me out of this dark place where I didn't really want to talk to a whole lot of people. I didn't really want to interact. I didn't want people asking me questions about what I had going on. So just my at-home issues, things that didn't have anything to do with sports, anything to do with school, those influenced me, I think, a lot more than people really realized that were around me at the time. So I would say that divorce really was one of the hardest things that I had to deal with as a student athlete. And nowadays, I think that's even more prevalent. I can think back being in middle school and even in high school, I maybe had a handful of friends that I would talk to about that, and they would say, yeah, my parents kind of going through the same thing. And nowadays, when I'm talking to kids, and it's not a knock on anybody, it's just kind of how things are. It almost seems like stepfathers and stepmothers, that's a very, very normal part of today's family structure. And so it's really important that when you're talking to an athlete to understand that structure and how it works. I had a wrestler this past year that there were some occasions where we had to be concerned about what parent was there because there were things in place, right? Mm-hmm. And so these are always things that you try to be conscious of as a coach. And then these are things that you try to be there for for your athletes. And I can definitely see how that creates some issues, because something as simple as transportation might seem simple to you and I. Call mom, have mom come pick me up. But if mom is working a 3rd-hour job and dad doesn't want to come pick you up because there's a dispute or things like that, then you run into a whole other gambit of issues. And so my thing really to help kids deal with those things is that we can only manage and change what we can manage and change. I can't dictate what my parents do. I can't dictate necessarily my living situation, but I can make the most of my academic situation, and I can commit myself as an athlete to my coaches and to what I have. And I think a lot of times when a student is going through some rough things like that, some things at home that they might not open up and discuss, that's when you really will see an athlete delve into the craft and spend those hours that they would spend worrying about other issues, really honing that craft. And I say this a lot to my athletes now. Our wrestling room is covered in red walls. And that red room was like my sanctuary when I got into high school. It was somewhere that I could go that I didn't have to deal with anything from home. I didn't have to deal with anything from class. I was in that wrestling room. And whoever I was drilling with, that was me and whoever I was drilling with. And so I think sometimes we forget as educators and the people who watch sports that every sport plays its role in everybody's life in a different way. And for some student athletes, that moment or that sport might mean more than anything else that they've got going on, because that's all that they've got to lean on. And so I try to be mindful of that when I'm talking to kids, that you don't want to punish a kid or take an opportunity from a child, but you want them to be serious and be committed. So I didn't mean to get so long-winded, but
No. It's good. That was good stuff. It was really good stuff. Because it just shows like you take your responsibility as a coach very seriously. Very serious.
Because you're more than a coach. I think too often we get caught up on the sport. Jump shots and double legs, routes and defensive schemes. And we don't spend enough time as a coach sometimes to get to know these kids and what they've got going on.
So that actually was going to be my next question. What advice do you have for, coaches to help them be more aware of what their players deal with personally, and how can they be a resource for them, and like you said, an outlet? How can a coach be that, that person that brings a child comfort regardless of whatever, what they're going through?
I think one of the biggest, now this is what works for me, and I'm learning this. I'm still relatively young as a coach. I've been doing it for a couple years, but like I said, I'm still relatively young at this. And so I've learned that my coaching style is not always what other people find comfortable or what people might advocate for, but it's what's worked for me. And that is just being as approachable as a human being as I can first, right? We're quick to want to establish that I'm the dominant person in this room, or that I'm the alpha in this room. And that comes with your posture and your class as a leader, right? You don't have to be loud. I don't have to make it a point for people to see that I'm a leader. I can do it with my behavior. And so a lot of times I try to just be approachable first, get to know a student, understand what makes them tick. And another mistake I think that coaches make is that they try to coach everybody the same. And I can't. I just can't. I'll give you a prime example. I got a wrestler named Lila. I got a wrestler named Mel, right? Now, Mel might be 10 minutes before that match. She might cry. She might get mad. She might cry again and then go beat a girl 15-0. And I not have to say anything to her, right? Lila might be over there quiet, right? And I have to get in her face and tell her we're going to go rip this girl's face off before she's jacked up, ready to go, right? So there's two completely different athletes, and I have to approach them in different ways. And knowing them as athletes and knowing them as individuals allows me to have that relationship to understand and decipher what behavior, what interaction is going to pull the best out of them. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's probably the big one. Be approachable. Learn your students and build that rapport, and the respect will follow. And one of the bigger things is that I try to make the team that I'm coaching as much as a family as possible, especially when you're dealing with a team you got 10, 15, 20 kids on the team. There's a lot of dynamics and personalities that can play individual roles in how things play out sometimes. and even parents who you never see even influence how things play out sometimes. So having a good rapport with a student, having a good rapport with their parents, and having a good relationship with them and understanding what their family dynamic is away from you will help you kind of interact with them. Every year I might have a kid who mom or dad might be a little late picking him up. He might not want to tell me off gate why mom and dad's late picking him up. Now, if I want to be a stickler and say, well, if your parents can't be here on time, you got to get off the team. And this kid might have a parent who's getting off work late. She's coming from the other side of Fayetteville, dealing with traffic, and is not getting to him late. The least I can be as a coach is to take the time to understand what's going on and be there for that family, because that moment might be 15, 20 minutes for me being away from my family, but that might mean the world to that family that needs that support in that moment. So just being approachable, being a coach that cares about your athlete beyond the athlete. They can do a lot for us on the field, and they can do a lot for us on the mat. But there comes a point when that mat stops and that court disappears and the lights cut off, and we got to go be functioning citizens in society. And you really have hope that you've touched kids in a way that they want to be functioning citizens in the same way that you expect them to be.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said that you coach girls and boys, and I don't think I've had anybody that I've interviewed thus far that or had on the podcast that have coached both. I don't think that any, and if they had, they didn't mention it. It was like clear of the sports that they've coached are, specific gender sports.
Right.
So how was that coaching boys and girls?
I'll say this: girls pay attention a lot more, but the issues are drastically different. Like, it's okay if my boys don't like each other, right? They still kind of click. They still kind of get along. They'll talk to each other, even if everybody's not 100% okay with each other. It's not like that with girls. I learned really quick with my girls team that if anybody felt any kind of way about anybody, it was going to be known. And then you throw in the sport of like wrestling, where you've got kids throwing each other around. They get really competitive really quick. Even the smaller girls are really scrappy with some of the larger girls. So I'll say that's probably one of the biggest things, that the girls, they need a more team-oriented environment. They thrive better in a more team-oriented environment. Whereas the males, it was almost like they're constantly chipping at each other to assert themselves to one another. Whereas the females can clearly see that there's some positives to having 3 or 4 girls who are all good and not just trying to declare one to be the best.
Interesting. That sounds like it goes towards the male ego.
You think so? I think girls are easier to coach. I think guys are
Well, that's what I mean. Like, they are, that ego kind of thing exists versus girls. Like, we're okay being a team, and we're not. And I mean, it may, like you said, be competitive, but we're okay if
right.
somebody else is better than us. Like, we're
Right.
not. We don't mind it. Like, we like, well, I'm as good as I get.
But now I'll tell you, if you're talking about consistency and the success on the season, my girls far succeeded the boys. I mean, I had a girl who was a finalist. We had an AAU nationals the week after state. No, it was 2 weeks after states. We had 3 come away with national championship medals. So my girls they bout it. That's all I'm gonna say. Them girls is bout it. Not saying my boys ain't, but them girls is bout it.
Well, of course, that's something I already know, that we are, even though we kind of catch a bad rep, even with the popularity of certain sports, you know what I'm saying? Like, of course, like a lot of the male dominated sports are super popular versus like say the NBA versus the WNBA, you know what I mean?
Right,
but
right.
the women probably could completely outshoot the guys, you know what I mean? Or out dominate the guys,
Yeah.
but the popularity of it just may not have that same attraction. So it's just interesting that you say like the girls were far more successful, even though it might not be the same amount of people coming to watch the girls wrestle.
So here's what's funny. this year's the first year that we traveled to the wrestling tournaments that had girls divisions, right? It was the first year they ever had girls divisions at the wrestling tournaments that we were traveling to. And it never failed. We would always have 3 or 4 girls, sometimes even 5 girls in the finals at every tournament we went to.
Oh, wow.
And it would be packed. It would be
really
packed. There was so many times this year where we had 40 and 50 people on the edge of the mat screaming, shouting, on the behalf of Hope County Wrestling at that. So it's an exciting time to be on the girls wrestling train here in Hope County.
I'm glad that their season didn't get cut short because of COVID.
Right, I am too. I am too.
You know, because a lot of people's season got cut short, but it just seemed like it ended right before COVID really hit, right?
I was going to say, they were talking about it the weekend we were at States, and so I was anxious to see how they were going to play that out. And, everything's still kind of up in the air now, so I'm anxious to see how the year plays out for next year. So.
Yeah. So what are 3 characteristics that, to you, in your opinion, make an athlete great?
Okay, so I know oftentimes you get a lot of kids that they end up in sports and they're really not 100% sure why they're there, right? In high school, I think you deal with a lot. I don't want to go home. I want to still be at school, or I want to still hang out with my friends. So you'll get some interaction in some sports just from that. And so I can say one of the things that has to be in place is that you have to want to be there, right? That's the first in an athlete. You have to want to excel at the sport you're playing at. It can't just be something that your dad wants. It can't just be something that mom wants you to do. It can't be something that you want to do to impress somebody. Those things are only going to get you so far. So that would be my first, the actual desire to be a successful athlete. The second, I would say, would be work ethic, the willingness to do what is required to be a good athlete when it's not the fun thing to do. With this COVID thing, everybody's kind of taking their own little breaks. You can't really meet up. There's no practices and things like that going on, unless it's a speakeasy. But there's nothing going on. So the kids that are really going to come back and be dominant are those kids that are really, really, really committed. And they really have the work ethic far beyond their peers. And it's going to show. It's going to show. When people hit the football field, you're going to be able to clearly see those kids that were at home pushing tires, swinging sledgehammers, doing push-ups and pull-ups. And you're going to see who was popping bonbons, eating Doritos, watching Mario with mommy. So I say work ethic would be my second characteristic. Third, I would say leadership. And I say leadership because leadership is one that gets overlooked. And anytime we think about leadership, we assume we're talking about a captain. We assume we're talking about a person that leads the team in points or wins. And I like to think about leadership in a way as a servant leadership, being an example, letting your integrity show without you even having to say it. I know you've probably been around people on sports teams where nobody had to tell you that guy knew what was going on or that lady knew what was going on, but the way that they carried themselves, you knew that was somebody that you could go and ask questions to. And I think at an early age, we kind of pigeonhole kids that we think, this kid's going to be a leader, that kid's going to be a leader. And so kids tend to hear this early on and are like, well, I don't really see myself as a leader. I didn't see myself as a leader either. I was 5'2" as a 9th grader. I was 4'5" as a 7th grader. You know what I'm saying? That should tell you how small I was. You could have never told me that people would look at me and consider me to be a leader. It took me being an 11th grader and somebody being like, bro, people are listening to you. People want to know what you think. We want to know what your opinion is. We like to hear you speak. The way that you articulate yourself helps us understand what we're dealing with. And so hearing those things from coaches at an early age let me know that, leadership is not really something that somebody else gets to dictate for you, right? Just because you don't see me as a leader doesn't mean that I can't be a leader. And that sometimes just because you're not a leader on your team in high school, that doesn't parlay into some other things. I know a lot of times, even when I graduated high school and I started working and things like that, anytime I got into a group setting, I instantly felt like I, to some degree, needed to lead whoever I was with because they had become part of my personality. And so I think it's important early on for student athletes to acknowledge for themselves that I don't have to have someone tell me that I can be a leader in athletics and be a leader. I can do that on my own. I can establish those things on my own just with my behavior. I don't have to be vocal. Everybody doesn't have to listen to me. But if I carry myself with class and I set an example with everything I do, that will speak for itself. So those would be my 3 characteristics. I would say the desire, right? Desire is a big one. Work ethic, and then leadership.
Yeah, I haven't gotten leadership yet. I've gotten a few different ones that I was like,
what are some other? I'm curious to hear. What are some other ones you got?
They were saying integrity.
That's a good one. Integrity is a good. So I like to lump that one in leadership because to me that's just a faction. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's like a small part of leadership.
Nobody has said like skill or talent or anything like that. Oh, they were saying how they treat people.
That's a big one.
I'm trying to think.
I think something we don't think about either.
Consistency.
Yeah, that's a
commitment.
That's a big one. Consistency is a big one because when you're dealing with especially high school students, you never know what you're going to get. And students at that age can be so temperamental, not necessarily temperamental, but their moods can sway one way or the other. And sometimes you don't know what athlete you're going to get. I might get Kobe on Monday, and before it's all done, I got Greg Oden sitting on the bench because he don't want to play no more. So.
So we're from Polk County, and participating in sports in Polk County. What does it mean to you to be an athlete from Polk County?
I was excited about this question when I saw this. I remember being, and I don't know that anybody else feels this way, and people probably gonna think this is corny, but it is what it is. I can remember being in the 7th grade, and we would go and play East-West games out at the high school, right? This is back before Sandy Grove was even a thing. So we would go and play. We would be I can remember being in the locker room, and Robert Blue used to get us hype. Coach Blue used to get us hype before the game. A team that can't be beat, won't be beat. A team that won't be beat, can't be beat. Man, we used to get so hyped. And there was so much pride in seeing Polk County athletics and wanting to get to that level. I remember walking down Buck Alley and being like, one day this is where I'm going to be at. This is where I'm going to be at. Mm-hmm. Never did I ever think, though, that I would be wrestling. It never crossed my mind that I'd be wrestling, but I was always anxious to get to that point. So when I got to the high school and I started wrestling and playing other sports, I ran cross country as well and a little bit of track. As I started playing sports and got competitive, that pride grew. And even now, I get really excited. We get kids the days of tournaments. You can tell I'm excited. We get kids together on the days of tournaments before we leave or when we get there and we do weigh-ins, and we'll lay down on the mat and we'll sit down and talk about what it means to be an athlete from Polk County, or what it means to get out there and grind and let people know every time they see that red singlet, every time they see that 4-letter word Hoke on that singlet, it's going to be there's something to be paid for, right? There's going to be something to be paid for. And so it's always been a very special thing to me to be from Polk County because it's a very unique area. You can go a lot of places and you'll hear a lot of negative things about Polk County, but anybody from Polk County knows it's so unique. The atmosphere on days like homecoming is such a unique atmosphere. And then to belong to that, to have that brotherhood of camaraderie. I know there are people all the time I'll see out in Rayford that I don't even know to be like, you're such and such, you do this or you do that, or things from high school that I don't even remember. And so I think, especially in a community like this, being involved in those athletics and being competitive in athletics in the community kind of carries some weight and some value to a lot of people.
Agreed. And I feel like everybody has said basically like people, they knew when we were coming or we was coming. And
that's right.
I always wonder where that came from. Where did that scrappiness, where did that, I guess, intimidation factor come from? Especially like you said, like we get a bad rap sometimes, or people have so much to say about us, but you know, we're such a unique place as well. Like, where did that spur from?
I had a kid, there's a guy named Clyde Thomas, God rest his soul, he's passed away now, but I wrestled with him when I was in high school. And Clyde was from Polk County and kind of had been some other places and got to see a little bit of the world, and I guess had come back to Polk County. And Clyde used to tell me all the time that we were so mean because everybody grew up so poor that by the time that we got older, we weren't going to take no nonsense from anybody else that had it easy. And I always thought that was funny because that team that year was really poor. So I always thought that was funny that he thought we were scrappy because financial situations kind of dictated that.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And there's nothing more exciting than being like to be a team that people called a poor team or whatnot, and you go to a nice place like Southern Pines and beat the snot out of Pinecrest. That's always really fun.
Right. Or Jack Britt.
Oh, I love Jack Britt's even better. That's even better. We ain't beat neither one of them in wrestling in a while, though, so I ain't gonna talk a whole lot.
Okay.
We beat Pinecrest in football this year, and we should have beat Britt, but I'll hush on that.
That game, child.
Yeah.
So what is one of your best sports moments or memories?
That's a good one. Can I give more than one? Can I give two?
Yes,
okay.
You can give two.
So I'll say, I don't even know if anybody else remembers this, but I was in the 7th grade. We were playing, I want to say Hamlet for the conference championship game at Robert Blue Gymnasium at West Hope, right? Jeremy Shaw gets a rebound. There's like 5 seconds left. We're down by a point. Antoine McGregor shot a 3. Jeremy Shaw gets the rebound, bounces one time, pro hops, shoots the layup, and comes to the sideline. And we're all hype about the game. And the first thing Jeremy Shaw asked Robert Blue was, why didn't you get on Antoine about shooting the 3 after winning the championship layup? I thought that was hilarious. And that moment, if that sticks with me to this day. The other would be my senior year, watching my teammate Dennis Gustafson in the state finals just murder this man legally in front of everybody, 9-0 in the final. Keegan Sykes was his kid's name. This kid was like 6'4". My teammate Dennis Gustafson was about 5'1", 103 pounds. And, man, he balled this kid up 5, 6, 7 different ways. And he come off the mat just as calm and classy as could be. And in that moment, he showed me that even as a athlete competing at the highest level, you can be classy and not lose your mind when you win a state championship.
Oh my goodness. And look, your best memories had nothing to do with you.
Right. They're always this team. So you want one from me? Like something that I did?
No. I just thought, It just shows me, but it shows what type of person you are. That your best sports memories have nothing to do with you. And mind you, this is an interview about you and your journey, but they have nothing to do about you. And I love that, though. I love that.
Well, now I got to give you one of me. Okay, so this is probably my biggest win I ever had. The kid I wrestled named Daniel Hernandez. He's a state champion, 2-time state champion from West Montgomery. We had a match out of East Hook because of the East-West game that was happening out at the high school. So this was like my first big match my senior year. I'd kind of had ruffled some feathers and made a little name for myself. And Dennis had wrestled this kid that I was going to wrestle that summer. Dennis is really, really good at this time. We're talking about it. He's like, this kid's really solid, but I think you got him. And so I'm really nervous. The first time I've ever really truly been like throw up nervous before a match. I went out, ended up wrestling. I think I beat the kid like 8-2, 8-3 or something like that. And as soon as the match is over, he goes crazy. He starts throwing chairs and things like that. And they get him settled down. They get him calm. And he ends up coming back over to me, man, and like congratulating me. That was probably one of the first matches that I'd wrestled somebody of his caliber and won in that type of fashion. So I'd say that's probably my biggest memory for me personally.
And I'm sure it gave you a lot of satisfaction at that age or at that place in your career to see somebody act like that from you beating them. You know what I mean? Because it's something when you beat somebody and they just shake your hand and walk off. You could tell they pissed, but you know. But for somebody to act like that, you probably were like, no.
I was so excited.
I'm that dude.
Hey, and the funny thing is, this is the era of like MySpace. So immediately that night, like we're on MySpace, junk talking each other, and like there's other guys in the area kind of like chiming in about how the match went and what they thought of it and that kind of thing. So it was really interesting for me.
And like I haven't even addressed this or even asked about this on the podcast thus far, but the like athletes and social media, Like, imagine what it would have been like had we
Oh
had
God.
that. Oh my God.
Honestly, I feel bad for the kids nowadays because they don't realize how closely watched they can be. And it's crazy, and it's kind of sad that it's usually till about 21, 22 they realize like everything and anything I put on the internet. This is how bad it is. I still get updates from memories that I posted on Facebook from back in 08 and 07, right? I was in high school. You can think about how far and how different my mindset maybe is now versus back then, right? So you can imagine some of the things that I've said after I see those memories. I'm like, oh dear, I should probably delete that. And the sadder thing is that now there are people that get paid to just do that, just to go to make sure that people are following rules and guidelines that have been set in place and that they're not crossing any boundaries as to what they put online. And I've seen firsthand kids lose scholarships because of statements that they've made online.
Especially as of recently,
very,
all the,
and so,
racial
perfect,
unrest.
Perfect.
Woo.
Yeah, and as much as you want to have a voice, it's almost better sometimes not to say anything at all on things that can be a little controversial, because anybody could really take what you say and kind of spin it in a way that might be perceived as negative for someone else.
Right.
And so sometimes if possible, it's just best to stay out of things that could be controversial as an athlete.
And that's
especially if you've got offers on the table and things like that.
Right. And that's something that we probably, and I don't know whether we're teaching our kids, but that's something that they should learn on very early on when they're starting to play athletics. Like, even if they're not even like a prospect, or it's not something that, they're serious about at the time, it's just something that they need to be aware of, period. I mean,
I think the bigger thing is that maybe it's talk. I hear it talked about quite a bit as a coach from other coaches that I'm around to athletes. I hear parents talk about it quite a bit. I don't think it's the message is not getting said. I think it's not getting understood. People are not being able, they don't have any friends that have lost scholarships, or they don't get to see it directly. I would compare it to the same thing that we have with this COVID thing, right? There's a lot of people not taking it serious, a lot of people taking it serious. Those that have relatives that are very sick off and that have lost their lives, they're taking it very serious. And those that have not, and they've not really seen the destruction of the pandemic firsthand, they don't know how to quite to take it just as serious. Mm-hmm. And so I would say the same for athletics.
Yeah, that's
like, you like that metaphor?
Yeah, I did. It's spot on. Spot on. So my last question is going to be, what is one piece of advice you would give to a young athlete in Polk County? And of course, I try to think of something different that you haven't said to your athletes.
I would say sell out. If it's something you really want, something that you really see feasible, sell out on it. Really be committed to it, and don't just tell yourself that. Don't just tell your family that. Let it be shown in the efforts that you have, in the tasks that you complete daily, and in the production that you make through time. I know I say a lot to athletes. It shows when you're committed. It shows when you've put the time in. That's one of the things that I probably was most prideful about our girls wrestling team this year, was that they don't get outworked. I don't care what's going on, what's coming up, who's sick, who's hurt. They don't get outworked. And that goes a long way as a 14, 15, 16-year-old, when there are hundreds and hundreds of other kids inside somewhere on a video game, on Snapchat, on social media. There are tons of other things that you could be doing. There are tons of other things that you could get into, and there are tons of other interests that you may have. But if that's what you want, and that's truly what you intend to pursue, then sell out. Cut out the video games. Cut out the social media. Cut out the junk food. Cut out the friends that you don't need. Cut out the relationships that are unnecessary. Cut those hours out spending time doing things that are pointless and don't lead to anything. cut those people out of your life that are pointless and don't serve you any purpose. Because at the end of the day, we live one of these. We got one of these trips, and when it's done, it's done. And we don't get to dictate when it's done. So if it's something you really want, and you from little old Rayford, and you stay in little old Hook County, it takes more from a student coming from a place like this than it does coming from somewhere else. And in order to be taken seriously, not only as an academic, but as an athlete, you have to sell out. You can't give it half heart. You can't give it half effort. You can't show up 70% of the time, 85% of the time, 95% of the time, because it'll show. It will show. And there are people out there that it might seem crazy to you, the lengths that they are willing to go to be successful, but there's always somebody out there that's just a little bit hungrier. And you don't ever want to see yourself in a situation where you're there and you don't succeed because you weren't prepared. You were given the opportunity to succeed, and you didn't because you weren't prepared. And so I'd say that to our student athletes in Hope County. There's something you want to do, sell out. Go make it happen. I don't need any excuse, because you could come up with 1,000.
Right. I love that. Brandon, this was such a great interview.
Well, thank you.
God. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know that we had to plan and schedule. I know you got 2 babies. I
don't know if you can hear them outside in the pool, but
no, I can't though. I cannot hear them.
Everybody get outside.
I can't hear
I gotta
them.
go outside long enough for me to do this interview.
But I really, really appreciate you taking the time, and I think this will be a great interview for anybody that's from Polk County, or anybody that just wants to learn more about us and who we are. I think it'll be a really, really good interview to listen to. So I thank you again. For anybody who is not following us, make sure you follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, for any updates and any new episodes that you want to catch. And make sure you check out our past episodes. And again, thank you, Brandon, for this interview.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you.